Dana White isn't afraid to say what he means. Unfortunately, that can get him into trouble, like UFC fighters wanting to go face to face with him. Here are some fighters who really want to knock Dana White out. The first one might surprise you: Tito Ortiz. At first, Tito Ortiz and Dana White were really close friends. In fact, Dana managed him back in his early UFC days, and it was this exact relationship that ended up leading to the Fertitta brothers, the childhood friends of White, buying the UFC from SEG back in 2001. Everything went south in their friendship after Dana took over as president and was forced to leave Ortiz's side. You might be asking what the big issue even is. Well, things got really bad after they got into a financial disagreement. The thing is, Ortiz wanted more money to fight his former friend Chuck Liddell than the UFC was willing to pay at first. Eventually, the two parties did come to an understanding, but only after Randy Couture took the Liddell fight and beat him. After that, Ortiz lost to Couture and then Liddell. But then by 2005, he was back on the winning track after winning against Patrick Cote and Vitor Belfort. But the Belfort fight ended his contract, and Tito began to badmouth White at every opportunity.
Because this is what they want to be.
That's your quote words.
No, because
I'm going to make you a superstar.
No, you're the one that wants to be a superstar. These guys want to be fighters. That's the difference.
Unsurprisingly, White returned the favor. It was a pretty huge surprise when Tito returned later that year. But what was even more surprising was that he added a special clause in his contract, which stated that he could take on Dana in a boxing match. There was even a documentary titled Bad Blood to build up the fight, but Tito ended up deciding against it. Why? Some people say that Dana had gotten the better of him in early training sessions, but considering that he was an amateur boxer, it's a bit hard to believe. Either way, the next time Ortiz's contract ended with the UFC, he wore a t-shirt stating, "Dana is my bitch." Now, we've already mentioned the next fighter's name in this video, and you might have guessed it already. He is Randy Couture. Randy Couture was the heavyweight champion at the time Dana White became the president of the UFC, but Couture's relationship with his boss got off on the wrong foot. Why? Well, he refused to be included in the UFC's earliest video game in 2002, and yet, despite this, Couture became the guy the UFC always went up to first for most of the decade, and he won 4 whole titles along the way. Things got bad in 2007. Couture was the reigning heavyweight champion yet again, but he suddenly left the UFC because he thought his contract with them was stopping him from fighting the former Pride champion Fedor Emelianenko, who had refused to sign with the UFC. And then things got really bad after Dana accused Couture of lying to him on multiple occasions when they used to work together. And how did Couture respond? He hit the UFC with a lawsuit. Zuffa responded in kind, even banned Randy's Extreme Couture clothing line. But when it became clear he was onto a loser, Couture finally returned a year after abandoning ship. Things were good until 2011 when Couture retired for good and decided to burn all his bridges with Dana. He refused to take a job with the UFC and Fox as an analyst and instead moved to their rival promotion, Bellator. Naturally, Dana was furious and he slammed Couture in the media whenever he got the chance to. Their relationship never healed after that.
Randy Couture comes off as the greatest guy in the world, Captain America. He's the furthest thing from it, and I'm happy to not be in business with him anymore.
The next fighter on this list is one of the UFC's most tenured fighters at heavyweight, Mark Hunt. Mark Hunt's grudge only started recently, in the summer of 2016 to be exact, but it arguably burns more strongly than any of the others on this list.
Mark Hunt, he kind of went off of you on Twitter yesterday.
Went off on me. He's always going off on me.
In his infamous lawsuit against the UFC, the fighters accused Zuffa, but mostly Dana, of everything ranging from fight fixing to racketeering to even ignoring doping from other fighters. In a way, the Aussie star actually has a point. He was chosen to fight Brock Lesnar when the champion decided to return to MMA at UFC 200. And yet, despite the fact that USADA is now overseeing the UFC's anti-doping program, Lesnar was still allowed to re-enter testing late based on some weird loophole. What's worse is that Brock went on to beat Hunt after that, and then tested positive for clomiphene. dopamine, a banned performance enhancer. And of course, Hunt was furious, especially considering he'd taken on the likes of Antonio Silva and Ben Rothwell in the past. He accused the promotion of turning a blind eye towards doping and then slammed them with a lawsuit. And though he still continued to fight, but after Hunt admitted to memory loss in an interview, his booking against Marcin Tybura got canceled because it was a possible sign of CTE. After that, Hunt's anger towards Dana only continued to grow. He recently let out an expletive-filled rant towards Dana in the UFC after being removed from the Tybura fight, and he vowed to bring the whole promotion down with him. If he was given the chance, he'd probably knock that bloke out, as he always loves to say.
I'm gonna get you. I'm gonna get your.
Moving on, let's move on to our next fighter, Chris Cyborg. Dana White probably wakes up every day and chooses violence. He's always getting on the wrong side of someone, and that includes his own fighters in the UFC too. In fact, this fight is even more recent than the last guy on this list. Chris Cyborg, who was a former Strikeforce, Invicta, and UFC champion, last fought in the UFC on the 27th of July back in 2019. She was scheduled to sign her contract, but first, she wanted to settle some business from the past. Now, Cyborg has always been put under the spotlight because of Dana. Before Ronda Rousey was the face of women MMA fighters, it was actually Cyborg. Before the UFC, she was signed with Elite XC and Strikeforce, which were the UFC's competitors. Now, she's fighting in Bellator. Anyway, back then, Dana White made some pretty offensive sexual and sexist comments about the champ.
When I saw her at the MMA Awards, she looked like Vanderlei Silva in a dress and heels. And she did. Didn't she not?
She's demanded an apology from him since then for the comments. But we haven't heard anything from the president. This list is coming to an end now. We finally come down to the last guy on our list, who is Frank Shamrock. The last fighter on the list, Frank Shamrock, is actually one of the pioneers of the sport.
Frank Shamrock in the short black trunks, Nick Diaz in the long black trunks.
In fact, he was champion long before Dana White and the Zuffa even took over the UFC. Now, the truth is that Shamrock never hit it off that well with White and his friends. As a result, he was never let to fight inside the octagon again. Things got so bad if the famous coach, Javier Mendez, had to change his academy from Shamrock submission fighting to American Kickboxing Academy so that he could get the fighters of the gym get signed to the UFC. Now, that is petty. Frank's accused Dana of a lot of things since then, but one of his most famous is definitely when he called him out for being a domestic abuser, racist, and bully. In a tweet he laid out for the world to hear, Dana White doesn't care. I watched him beat up a woman and then celebrate. He is a racist, liar, bully, and generally a bad person.
First of all, I never came out and bullied or said anything about Cyborg. I was asked a question by the media.
And that's a wrap for this video. Were you surprised about any of the fighters on this list? Let us know in the comments below, and see you in the next one.